Hello and welcome to everyone joining us online for the webinar this evening. My name is Freya Leishout. I'm a student recruitment officer here at the Faculty of Education. Um, Tonight is the final prospective student webinar for our Master of Teaching Secondary Internship program. Some of you joining us online this evening may have already submitted an application. Some of you are just potentially wanting a bit more information before you submit your application. So tonight there'll be a chance for you to ask some questions and learn a bit more about the program to see if it's suited for you. Joining me tonight and who will speak about the program is Dr. Scott Cameron, who is part of the Master of Teaching Secondary Internship program. So I'm going to pass it along to Dr. Cameron now, who will get started with the presentation. I will also be answering questions if you put them through on the chat as we go. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Freya. It's my pleasure to be here tonight to talk to you in this Discover the Master of Teaching Secondary Internship course. As Freya said, I'm acting course coordinator for the Master of Teaching Secondary Internship. I've also had experience in this course in supervising and supporting our interns while on their school-based employment, as well as teaching in the learning area mathematics subjects. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which our campuses are located. I'm coming to you from home today, which is on Wurundjeri lands. And I think when we're thinking about teaching and reflecting on the contribution of our Indigenous people, it's important to recognise that through thousands of years of culture of storytelling and sharing through dance and stories, that in many ways our Indigenous people are our first teachers. Tonight, we're going to go over three key parts related to the program. The first will be to give you an overview of the Master of Teaching Secondary Internship. We'll provide some information on how to apply and the next steps in the employment process if you apply and are accepted. And we'll also have some time for Q&A at the end. If there's questions you're thinking of as we go through, feel free to pop them in the Q&A function where Freya will be able to respond to them as we go. Now, why you might choose to do the Master of Teaching Secondary Internship. As an initial teacher education course, the Master of Teaching Secondary Internship allows you to graduate and apply for full VIT registration with the Victorian Institute of Teaching. So this means after 2 years, you'll be eligible to be employed as a classroom teacher in Victoria or other states. Now, the benefit of completing the internship over perhaps a standard Master of Teaching course is that by the end of that 2-year degree, you will have already had 2 years of hands-on teaching experience in the classroom, which may give you a competitive edge, both for employment, but also in your practice when compared to graduates from the standard Master of Teaching course. A big bonus that might be interesting or relevant for some of you is the idea that you'll be able to earn a salary while studying. So in the Master of Teaching Secondary Internship, you will complete the course full-time, but alongside that, you will be working in a Victorian school, either in the government or independent sector, working up to a 0.8 time fraction and being paid for that, as well as receiving a study loading to allow you to attend university classes throughout the semester, as well as to engage in assignments and things like that during your course. There are Commonwealth supported places available and a range of different scholarships being offered by the university and Department of Education at this time. Now, one of the things that makes a Master of Teaching at Melbourne really unique is our structured support and mentoring throughout the program. Now, in the internship, we recognise that the program and your progress is a three-way party, a three-way agreement invested in that, in yourself, your employer in the school, as well as ourselves as the university. And in terms of providing this support and mentoring, we provide that through your formal classes, through pairing you with what we call a clinical specialist who comes out and observes you and supports you in a range of different ways throughout the semester as you're working in the school, as well as your school investing in you by providing time release for an experienced teacher to act as your mentor, whether that's supporting you to develop lesson plans, supporting you through observing your classroom practice, or a range of other different ways that they can support you. This is really useful given we recognise that the internship is a very full-on way to complete the course, working up to 4 days a week in school. And so our current interns really value the support that they're able to get from their clinical specialist who visits regularly, as well as having that formal mentoring support in the school. Our interns work in a range of different areas, and part of the reason that people choose to enroll in this course is to help address workforce shortages, particularly in regional areas. Now, in 2024, we have a range of students working in metropolitan Melbourne, but we also have students working in almost every corner of Victoria in different regional settings. So if you're living in a regional area or perhaps would like to relocate to a regional area, the internship provides a way to support you to engage in a school in a regional area whilst earning that income while you're working. Now, we have a really diverse group of interns, from people who have come straight from an undergraduate degree into a Master of Teaching Secondary. We have career changers who might have had distinguished careers in a range of different fields. And we also have our Master of Teaching Secondary students who have the option to transfer across in the second year of their program. What this means is that there's a really diverse group of interns that you'll be studying with, and our interns find the on-campus components really valuable to create these professional networks that then offer support when you're back in your school, to know that you've got colleagues who are going through the same experience. In terms of the course overview, so as an initial teacher education course, this will qualify you to teach students aged 12 to 18 years, so secondary years, and it is a 2-year course duration, or if you're a current Master of Teaching student, there is a 1-year option if you're transferring across. Now, the course commencement for 2025 is on January 6th, and this is for both those who are starting the course fresh, as well as those who are transferring across from the standard Master of Teaching program. Now, as a full-time course, it is very intensive, and I'll talk about that a little bit further on. But the key thing is that you're paired with up to a 0.6 full-time teaching load in a Victorian secondary school, or up to 0.8 full-time teaching load in a Victorian non-government school. Now, the time fraction can be thought of as days per fortnight. So 0.6 is 6 days out of the 10 in the fortnight, 0.8 being 8 days out of the 10 in the fortnight. Now, the on-campus delivery is through 3 intensives, as well as online classes scheduled throughout semester 1 and 2 across the year. And these are all timetabled not to interfere with your school commitments. For example, we ask schools not to have you working on Fridays, as that's the day that our on-campus class, our online classes, are scheduled. Across the course, you'll study 13 subjects, and the list of those and the sequencing of those can be found on the Master of Teaching website. And these are done in 3 intensive study blocks, as well as throughout the semester. So at the start of the course, as a new student, you will have a 2-week study intensive in January, followed by 1 subject, which is completed throughout semester 1 on Fridays. You'll then have a second online study intensive in winter of that first year, followed by classes on Fridays throughout semester 2. In your second year, you then have a 2-week intensive in January, followed by online classes throughout semester 1 and semester 2. Now, as I mentioned before, in terms of the employment, our schools provide a 0.2, so that's 1 day a week study allowance for you to engage in the course. So what that means is if you're working 0.8 within a school, you will be paid a full-time salary because of that 0.2 bonus that is paid upon it. Now, one thing to keep in mind in addition to this is there is a orientation period in November and December of the year before, which is where once you've been employed by a school, you will do things like go get a tour of the school, perhaps meet some of your colleagues, get timetables, all of those sorts of things. Now, a key part of the Master of Teaching is your enrolment in learning areas, and these align with the subjects that you'll be teaching within your secondary school. Now, in thinking about which of these you might be eligible for, they're typically aligned with the majors or minors in your degree. There are particular requirements for each of these, and you'll see there's a website there that outlines the requirements. Now, what we do is we look at your bachelor degree and any postgraduate study to help determine what your learning areas might be. So say, for example, an engineer might come through with an engineering degree, and looking at the subjects, we might determine that you're eligible for mathematics and physics. Now, we need 2 learning areas in order to be eligible for the course. And if your learning areas do not appear here, they are not offered in the internship, but you may be eligible or they may be offered in our standard Master of Teaching course, which has a much broader range of learning areas. Now, a key thing to think about these learning areas within the Master of Teaching is that these teach you how to teach history or languages or biology. They don't necessarily teach you the content that you need in order to do that. That's something that we assume you have based on your previous studies or previous employments, or we expect you to refresh your knowledge as you progress through the course so that you're able to teach that content to your students. In terms of the selection process, the first step is that you would submit your application. Now, a really important thing is that applications close on the 29th. So if you're still thinking, you're not sure about whether you wish to apply for this year, keep thinking over the next few days because you do only have until Thursday to apply. Now, one thing that's not shown on this summary is completing what we call the Teacher Capability Assessment Tool, the TCAT. And this has to be completed before you're eligible to apply and enroll in this course. So you will submit your application, which will be then assessed, and you will receive a conditional offer if you meet the conditions of the course. Once you've received this conditional offer, you go into the employment phase of the selection process. What we ask you to do is to complete an employment profile, nominating your employment pool, for example, whether you wish to work in the independent or government sector, time fraction preferences, as well as geographic preferences. These profiles are then shared with our partnership schools, who then determine the candidates that they wish to interview in their schools. Conditionally enrolled candidates are then invited to attend interviews at relevant schools, and if you're successful, you're made an employment offer and the university enrolment is finalised. The next step, once that employment offer is made and the enrolment is finalised, is that we go through the application for the permission to teach program with the VIT, which is done by both the school and the individual with the university support, as well as assessing VIT English language requirements. We then wait a few weeks to receive permission to teach approval from the VIT, and then start your course in December 2025 with the orientation, and then moving on to the study intensive in January. Now, one of the key things to think about this enrolment process is that it is a competitive process. So the benefit of that is that the school who selects you, if you're successful, will be invested in you. They will recognise your potential and will recognise and want you to succeed in the course. So this is really your time to shine and to win the schools over and show your commitment, what an excellent teacher you're going to be. Now, the employment process is done through a portal called UniConnected, and this you'll receive information on this following the enrolment application process, and you'll receive this profile like this, which all of our partner schools have. And what happens is you will log into this profile, and through a few easy steps, you will develop your own profile, where you will list things like learning areas, which are those that you've been enrolled to, geographic areas, and any relevant experience or information that you might have. Once all of our students have completed their profiles, we then open this up to our partners. So these partners can log in, can sort through our interns and select the ones that they wish to interview for their position. Now, in terms of the course, there are Commonwealth supported places for eligible students, and some applicants may be eligible for the fee help program, where you can defer part or all of your tuition fees, where you don't need to repay the loan until your income reaches a minimum threshold. And the university website offers further details on this. In terms of salary, the minimum salary you will be paid is at a paraprofessional level 1.3, which is per the Department of Education guidelines, which as of January 2024 was just over $62,000 per year. Of course, this scales according to the time fraction that you're employed for. In terms of scholarships, there's a range of different scholarships that are available to our students through the Victorian and Australian governments, such as Indigenous scholarships, government scholarships enticing people to teaching, as well as allowances for rural and remote studies. And the idea here is that these programs are really aimed to help our students in easing the transition, perhaps from full-time work back to study, and working through the internship program. In terms of entry requirements, admissions, and other relevant information, a key thing to be aware of is the Teacher Capability Assessment tool. Now, Freya will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that this needs to be done before you're able to apply to the university. So if you're thinking about applying before Thursday, it would be worth getting onto this as soon as possible. In terms of undergraduate degrees, we need an undergraduate degree from an approved institution which qualifies for 2 learning areas, which are what I described previously. You'll see the link there that will provide information about the requirements needed for each of the 2 learning areas, but generally it is 2 subjects at first year and 2 subjects at second year. You need to meet the University of Melbourne English language requirements, and link to information is provided there, as well as you also must be eligible to be granted permission to teach by the VIT, as well as meeting the English language requirements, which can be found on the VIT website, as well as providing and passing any necessary police checks, for example. Now, a key thing to know is that due to the nature of the internship, this course is only eligible and open to domestic applicants. In terms of what happens next, once you receive a conditional offer to the university, we go through an onboarding and then moving through into the employment process. So part of that onboarding is to complete a survey and your preferences around your employment pool, things like location, learning areas, time fraction, etc. Completing your uni-connected profile to be connected quite quickly by mid-September, with the employment process then opened with the aim to have all of our interns in secure employment shortly after. In terms of how to apply, applications are currently open and will close on the 29th of August. So again, if you're not sure yet whether you wish to apply or not, I would encourage you to get organised and to get those applications in, and to be sure to complete the TCAT before that application is lodged. All applications are made online, and there's a link there to the Faculty of Education website where you can find information on how to apply for the course. If you're needing any guidance or any of the information we talked about today, jumping on Google and searching the UniMelb Master of Teaching Secondary Internship will take you to the course page, which goes through in lots of detail the key dates, the employment process, the application process, learning area requirements, and the course structure in terms of the subjects as well. That's about it from me, so I'm happy to spend time taking any questions that might have popped up in the chat or any other ones that people have now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Scott. So there's one question I have, which I feel like might be one a few people are thinking about, and that is if people are away over the employment period, if they're overseas on a trip, how would that work?
Yeah, so in terms of the employment period, so that's the period that's happening September, October, we're understandable of the commitments that students have. We know that a student with a conditional enrolment is not a current student and so does not have to meet any of our requirements. In this case, you'd be able to indicate in those employment profiles and in that placement questionnaire that your availability might, for example, be limited to a Zoom interview. And so schools who wish to have an interview with you through that process would be able to arrange a Zoom meeting or similar at a time that would be convenient for both parties. So certainly flexibility is being made there if, for example, you're not able to attend a face-to-face interview.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And one thing I just wanted to also confirm, mathematics as a learning area, is that available as a double learning area for the MITSI program?
No, so mathematics
Perfect.
will be coming in, but not until 2026, I understand.
All good. So for anyone interested in a mathematics learning area, at this stage, it would be mathematics and something
Plus
else as well.
something else, and you'll have the pleasure of being taught by me. So I'd encourage you to have a look for that second learning area and see if there is an area that you might be interested in as well as qualified for.
Perfect. We do have some questions from those who have transferred from the Master of Teaching Secondary
Yep.
into MITSI. can they go back to secondary at this stage if they choose
Yeah.
no more?
So one of the really nice things that we have in our course design is that the course content and workshops, lectures, etc., are all parallel. So exactly the same course content in the Master of Teaching Secondary internship and the Master of Teaching Secondary. Now, what that means is if you come into MITSI and halfway through the course, for example, you decide the workload is too much, life changes, and you want to jump back into the standard course, that is something we can facilitate. Similarly, if you've come from the standard course, have transferred into MITSI and are now unsure, we can withdraw that offer for you and you can continue in the normal Master of Teaching. Or if you get into your employment next year, for example, decide it's not right for you and want to jump back into the standard Master of Teaching, that can be facilitated as well. There's a little bit of paperwork on our end, but the fact that we deliver the same content with the same assessments across both streams enables that flexibility to move between the courses if life gets in the way and we need to make these changes.
Excellent, wonderful. And I had a few questions which you might better give some insight on, and that is typically how a student would commence their employment period. Would they typically start with some observations? Would they have someone in the room with them? How would that initial first couple of weeks work January next year after they've done the intensive on
Yeah.
campus?
Yeah, perfect. And that's a really good question. So one of the key things to recognize is that orientation period that happens around December where you go in and meet your schools, because that's really an important time to talk about and map out those first few weeks around what the supports are. Now, in the internship, you will be allocated your own classes. So if you're allocated Year 7B English, you will be teaching Year 7B English and any other classes from the very first day of Term 1, 2025. So it's important to know that you will be a classroom teacher working up to 4 days a week from the first day of term. Now, in terms of what support is offered, this is where the university and the school both band together to provide that support. One of the key strategies we talk about is having you go and observe other teachers, including your mentor teacher. We also talk to schools about having you paired. So for example, if you're teaching Year 7 English, having another Year 7 English teacher to work closely with to support you in things like planning, with establishing classroom routines, things like that. We also would have your mentor teacher regularly coming and observing your classes, as well as your clinical specialist from the university. That said, it is the expectation that our interns will teach independently from that very first day of term 1. And the January intensive is developed with that in mind. So lots of the things that we do in that January intensive are practical. We want to get you standing up the front of class. We want to get you talking to students, to role-playing different situations, so that when you step foot in that classroom for the first time on the first day of term 1, you're as prepared as you can be. Now, you won't know everything that you will need to know, and that's because it's a 2-year course. But you learn a lot from applying that knowledge that you get in January, from engaging with your mentor teacher and clinical specialist throughout the semester, as well as being flexible, taking on feedback and striving to improve your teaching. The first term is probably the most difficult term of the course. But many of our teachers look back on that period and feel proud of the fact that they were able to get through it and have seen the professional growth that they've demonstrated in that time.
Wonderful. Thank you so, so much. Now, just to confirm, we've had a few people asking with the December orientation, is it likely to be 1 day with the schools? Is it up to the school's discretion?
So I think it's recommended that this is a very good question. I wish Adam was here, who's the not acting course coordinator. The details will be made available as soon as possible, but I understand it's a day of university orientation, which involves presentations from VIT, for example, around the code of conduct, the code of ethics, and then at least a day with your school. We recognize as you're an employee and the school is the employer, if they wish for you to attend more or you wish to attend more to get a better sense leading up into January, then that can be negotiated as well. We can get the specific dates though, and I presume we can share them with the recording, Freya.
Yes, that is correct. So we can get the dates. But one thing to note for anyone who applies, um, this information, if you receive a conditional offer, you do get a bit of information about upcoming dates and deadlines, particularly things that are going to be really crucial to you as well. Um, One thing just to ask you, you may have some information about this one, um, you may not, is typically how many schools are looking at having an intern. Ha- Have they already expressed interest? How many schools have we had in the past? Just to see what the options are.
Yeah, certainly. So there's a whole range of different ways that partners can engage with us. So one of the ways is through our connection with the Department of Education, who will recognize schools who have positions vacant and suggest that an internship might be suitable. So in that case, the Department of Education is doing some of that connecting. We also connect with hundreds of schools through our standard Master of Teaching placements program. And so we invite those schools as well to engage with the internship course. We also have schools that reach out to us, whether they've heard from another teacher at another school who have a staffing need, for example, and they get included on our expression of interest as well. Now, in terms of numbers, off the top of my head, the 2024 cohort was, I want to say 80, and they're probably spread across 70 different schools, both independent and government. That being said, we do have the capacity to expand, and interest in the program typically is very strong. That being said, it is a competitive process in that recruitment process. So it may be that geography might not match, things like that. But we recognize that interns or people who apply to the course are committed to it. And so if we are struggling or don't have an immediate match for you, that's when we reach out to the department to try and call in some other contacts to try and find employment options for that particular intern. So it's hard to put a firm number on our partners because it changes. Some schools might express interest initially and then have their staffing needs change. Others might come in very late in the part. Others we might need to go searching for. So it's really quite hard to put a number on exactly how many partners we engage with.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Another question, which you might be able to give some good insight to. I feel like it's always good when you've got an academic speaking on this, is are there learning areas that tend to be more popular? One thing I can say from a recruitment perspective is the reason the MITSI program, as we love to call it, the reason the MITSI program has less learning areas is because we typically have the more popular learning areas offered in the MITSI program compared to our secondary program. The reason for that is we don't want to set applicants up to not be able to secure an internship because it is part of the process. That is something I will say. Scott, if you have anything else to add to that, please feel free to share.
Yeah, and another thing that was leading into that selection of the learning areas offered in MITSI is, again, through a collaboration with the Department of Education to recognise where in Victoria there are the shortfalls, and so the need to have internship programs and permission to teach programs. So that learning areas are offered both because they're popular, but also because they've been identified by the department as being areas of need in terms of staffing. Now, if you wanted to get a sense of just how in demand teachers are, you can head to the Department of Education Recruitment online website. You can filter to classroom teacher, put in your learning areas, and I'm guessing at this time of year, which is very busy for recruitment in schools, dozens and dozens of jobs for each and every of the learning areas that we offer. So certainly teachers are very much in demand at the moment and will continue to be. And the learning areas that we offer tend to align with the areas in demand within schools. And as I said, part of the employment process is the department looking out to schools who have particular needs and then trying to match them to our internships as well. So there's a range of different ways that we can get different programs or different partners on board to accommodate interns who have applied for the program.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So that was very, very helpful. Um, I'm just trying to think. Oh, another thing to note as well is if you submit an application, automatically assessed for a Commonwealth supported place. So that's something to consider if you are looking to apply. There's no separate application you need to submit for that one if that's something you were looking at. Another question we've just had that I'll be able to answer is there is no deferral option for this program. We've just had a question come through because part of condition of the enrollment is to secure the employment. Um, if something changes, you can withdraw from the course, but there is no option to defer it. If you were to withdraw from the course or decline, you would need to apply again at a later intake. It's not going to hinder your chances if you do that. Do not stress. But just letting some of you know who have the deferral question, there is no option to defer it. Another question we have is that you might be able to speak more on is going through our process to secure our internship, as opposed to contacting a school directly.
Yeah, so there's certainly times where, and we've had in the past, where an applicant has a relationship with a prior school. For example, we've had someone who has worked as an education support officer within that school and then wishes to apply in the internship. In that case, we can kind of bypass the employment process because we've already done that initial matching, and we can just facilitate that conversation and paperwork on the university's end. In terms of contacting schools directly, it's not something that we tend to recommend unless perhaps you already have a contact there and want to casually raise a question. And the reason for that is just to avoid, I guess, overloading schools who may have already been approached about the internship program, perhaps by the university because they've already had an existing relationship, and perhaps by the Department of Education because the department has been reaching out on a range of fronts. So we tend not to suggest going out hunting for your own internship just to avoid the pressure that that can place on schools. But certainly if there's a known relationship with a school and the school has expressed interest, and obviously you are interested as well, then that's an avenue that we can pursue. Otherwise, it tends to be all done through that competitive process. I guess the benefit for the school then is that the principal, whoever the panel is, can be assured that they have also got the best applicant that is suited for them, rather than the applicant who is proactive and emailed them first, for example. So that's why we tend to have this model of the competitive employment process, rather than facilitating individual connections with schools.
Excellent, thank you. And we've just had another question that I thought might be good for you to speak on. And that is if someone's looking to upskill in their career to teaching, what would be the benefit of doing this program as opposed to others? The person asking the question has not clarified if it's better to do the MITSI program or our secondary program or this program over competitors.
Yeah, so I can talk to both. So the reason why you might choose the internship over the standard course is for many of our interns earning a living wage while you're completing the course. That is one of the main drivers that people look for. Another key thing, particularly for our students who are transferring from a standard MTeach to the internship, is after a year of their Master of Teaching studies, feeling confident enough and ready for that next challenge to step into the classroom and to benefit from it. Now, that's not going to be the right thing for everyone. It's something to reflect upon your own preferences where you're at. But that's certainly one thing why people might choose the internship over the standard Master of Teaching. Now, why you might choose the University of Melbourne over other courses. In many ways, they're all 2-year master's degrees to become a secondary teacher. One of the things that Melbourne does really, really well, and I really believe in this because it's a large part of the course that I'm involved in, is the support that we offer our interns or our teacher candidates in the standard course while they are in their placement experience. So the fact that you can be anywhere in Victoria, and this is a case in this year, and we will have a university staff member, an academic, come out and observe you in the classroom to provide feedback. to advocate for you in your school if you are having issues with timetabling or any things like that, issues with mentor teachers, who can, look over lesson plans, things like that for you to provide that level of mentoring and support that is enabled or that will enable you to succeed. The other thing the university offers throughout this program, which is not something that you will see, is the support that we offer to our mentor teachers as well. Now, these are the people who are in the schools working with you on a daily basis, but also having time allocated as part of their workload to support you through lesson observations, through collaborative planning, through professional conversations. And when a school signs up to be part of the internship program, they also receive training on effective mentoring. So I guess the key thing is recognizing this three-way partnership between the university, the intern, and the school, and providing the necessary supports and being flexible and responsive in those supports in order to allow you to succeed. Now, there are universities that don't have staff members who will come out and observe you in the classroom and who will not have that layer of support. I think if I was choosing an initial teacher education degree, that in-class support that you or in-person support that you get from those staff members is really valuable, particularly as that question spoke about at this earlier, in those first couple of weeks where you're trying to sink or swim. We will help you swim. It is one of the key things that I think sets us apart from our competitors. Freya might have other things to add from a recruitment perspective. I'm not sure.
Yeah, obviously, this program I feel like does speak for itself, and has gained a lot of popularity in recent years as people have potentially gone through career changes or looking to upskill. Um, Personally, one of the benefits of the program is that although you are working and earning an income and you are studying, the balance, yes, it is quite um, intense, but the balance is not designed to overwhelm you. Typically, people who have come from full-time work, it's something that they can balance. The reason we have the on-campus intensive at the start is to get you set up, is to get you ready. Our reputation at the Faculty of Education does mean we have really good and standing relationships with schools, both government and non-government, and we've been able to see that there is that need for non-government internships in recent years as well. Another thing is the support that's available. So Scott has mentioned there's an incredible amount of support available to our students, both on campus if they were to walk into the building, but also via emails. It's something that if they're not as close to campus as well, they can still get the same amount of support someone right next to our Parkville campus can receive. One question you
Can
might
I
be
can I add
able,
one more thing before
of
we go?
course.
Because I was just thinking while you were going. I think one of the other things that sets this program apart is the parallel nature of the Master of Teaching and the Master of Teaching secondary internship. So Melbourne has had an established Master of Teaching program and indeed an internship program for a number of years. I think one of the benefits in offering that parallel offering and that our teaching staff really enjoy is making those connections to practice. So our teaching staff are really invested in your development, even if they only see you perhaps once in a core subject. They're wanting to know what's happening in schools and how they can support that. So I think I should have thought of our teaching staff first, given I'm one of them. But really key, everyone is invested in wanting to see you succeed. And we have spent the time developing a really wonderful course. And that's exactly the same course as if you were to choose to do the Master of Teaching secondary. And so having that, I guess, evidence-based course that's coming through and the strength behind that flowing directly through into the internship model is a real strength as well. I'll let you get to the next question, Freya.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I will also kind of on the same line, you may have some information about this one, you may have a bit of more knowledge than I do. The main difference between this program and Teach for Australia, or how we kind of differ for Teach for Australia. I know some staff have a bit of knowledge about that one. I'm not sure if you're able to speak to that one at all.
No, it's not something
That's okay.
I'm aware of, sorry.
All good, all good. I know there's a slight difference. There is a lot of information online about Teach for Australia if you're interested. Obviously, this program that we run, the Master of Teaching Secondary Internship, it's a program run by the Faculty of Education at the University of Melbourne for the Faculty of Education at the University of Melbourne. So it's a course we run by us for us. So it's not through a third party or anything like that. It is directly through us. I'm just seeing if there's any other particular questions that have come up that might be of interest. Um, okay, this one might be something um that you might be able to speak on. I know we've just touched on a little bit of it previously. Would you say the amount of support a MITSI student receives is equivalent to a Master of Teaching secondary student receiving, given that one's on campus a bit more than the other?
No. So in terms of, well, I guess there's two perspectives to think about it. In terms of the coursework, we don't see any difference between an internship student and a Master of Teaching student. So tutors are always available via email outside of teaching weeks. We're always available for those conversations after class, things like that. So in terms of in learning area subjects, core subjects, the level of support is the same. Where the difference comes in is the standard Master of Teaching has 3 20-day placements spread across the 2 years. And so they need, the nature of the placement also differs. They are paired with a mentor teacher that they follow for the entire time and progressively take over those classes and observe their classes. Now, that is fundamentally a very different experience from the internship, where you are independently teaching in a school up to 4 days a week. So we differ in terms of the support from the university in that practicum component, in the in-school component, but in terms of the support provided to the students in the coursework aspects, then no, we support all our students regardless of which course, but certainly the clinical specialist support, the in-school support is ramped up for MITSI, recognising the intensity of the course due to the nature of it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. One thing I know that we will touch on in the non-government employment webinar, some of people are asking it now, is can a school add school sport to a timetable to increase your teaching load?
Not unless you are PE, and I don't think we offer PE in MITSI. So the Permission to Teach internship scheme, which is run by the Victorian Institute of Teaching, has a range of criteria around who can be employed for permission to teach, but also what you can be employed to teach. As an intern, you are limited to teach within your learning areas. So for example, if I was maths and physics, it means I would be teaching maths or physics. Now, the physics could stretch to, say, a junior science. So if you're a history and English, that could stretch to humanities. But outside of those learning areas, no, things cannot be contributed and added to your teaching workload. Now, extracurricular activities, going on school camps, going on excursions, things like that are, of course, part of a teacher's work, but it is not expected that that would be part of your independent duties. So you could be invited to attend school sport, for example, but you would be supervised by a fully qualified teacher because that is outside of the learning areas and the permission to teach scheme.
Wonderful, wonderful. Another thing I will note as well for some of you interested is you will have your learning areas in this program, but after you graduate and have your VIT qualification, you won't just be limited to those learning areas. So some of you were a bit interested in that one. Just wanted to let you know, Scott, if you want to add anything to that one, please feel free.
Correct. So yeah, once you are employed and out in a school, the school can employ you to teach whatever they think you are fit to teach for. One of the aspects of the course, which you can find information on in the website, but we didn't talk about, is you will undertake what we call a foundations subject in your final semester. Now, these foundations subjects are almost can be thought of as a third learning area. So they're an introduction to teaching a learning area at year 7 and 8. And these are designed to kind of fill the gaps where you might be teaching just outside the learning area. So say, for example, our maths physics person might do a foundations of science teaching. recognizing that in a school, it's quite likely they would need to teach year 7 and 8 science. Or an English history teacher, for example, may take foundations of humanities teaching so that they can fill that little gap there to provide that little edge in those areas of which they may be requested to teach, even though they're out of their learning areas. Now, those foundation subjects are science, mathematics, English, languages, and humanities. And they are kind of those options to give, and I think there's digital technologies as well, to give that little taste of a third teaching area to make it easier. For example, once you're out in full employment and a school says, great, you're teaching maths, you're teaching VCE physics, and you've got a year 7 science class. So it's to fill that little bit of a gap and to give a bit of a boost to our graduates there.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for confirming that one. Some people have a question about what exactly they will learn in the intensive in January, particularly what subjects they will do, what they'll do before they prepare.
Yep. So in the January intensive, you will complete, so learning areas are done in a sequence of 3 subjects, learning area 1, 2, and 3. They're done January intensive, winter intensive, and then January of the second year. So in that first intensive, prior to you going into schools, you will complete all of your coursework for your learning area 1 subjects. The idea behind that is to give you as much as possible to enable you to succeed in those learning areas once you get out onto schools. In addition, you will complete half of a subject called Engaging and Assessing Learners 1. The other half is done on Fridays throughout semester 1. Now, Engaging and Assessing Learners 1 has a focus on school context, so it will prompt you and get you thinking about things like school culture and how to set up positive classroom routines, how to build relationships with students, relevant school policies and how they impact the work of a teacher. Now, again, the idea of splitting it between the January intensive and semester 1 is to try and front end that content knowledge that you will need. For example, we look at things like, what are you going to do on your first day with that first class? What's the first thing you're going to say to them? Or what sort of activities might you use to start building a positive classroom environment? How might you set up a classroom? How might you lay out the furniture? Things like that. So really front-ending those practical experiences and knowledge that you'll need to have success. Throughout the first semester, you'll finish off Engaging and Assessing Learners 1, as well as completing a subject called First Nations in Education, which will introduce you to thinking about Indigenous contexts and how they can be embedded into the teaching of your learning areas. So we certainly think in learning area 1, our aim is to give you the best preparation possible for you to swim once you get into that first week of school. And so, as I said before, lots of practical activities to get you thinking about, well, if I'm teaching English, what does English teaching even look like? What does an English lesson look like? What do students do? What sort of activities can we do? And then in the later intensives, we build upon that knowledge, generally by thinking in semester 2 about VCE contexts, and then in semester 3 of the course, looking at broader issues across the learning area. So really structured to front end that practical knowledge before building on it as we go through. And of course, recognizing in later semesters, drawing in your classroom experience so that we can tailor our workshops to perhaps your points of need to provide exactly what you need in order to be a successful teacher in this course.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I've had 2 questions come through that you might be able to give some insight in. First one is payment, so receiving a salary over school holidays, how that would work for an intern,
Yep. So the
if you
way
might
that
know.
Department of Education contracts work is you, in the internship program, is you're employed on a 2-year contract. So that contract might start generally a couple of days before term 1. So let's say the 24th of January, and it would be a continuous 2 years employment period until the 24th of January, 2027. So that means you would be paid over school holidays, you would be paid over the Christmas holidays, right up until that 2-year period expires.
Perfect, perfect. And another one you might be able to speak on, just because you're a bit more involved in the industry than myself, is an applicant having visible tattoos, how that would work. Going to interviews, is that something you can speak about?
Yeah, so this is one of the, it depends on the school. And it's not as simple as making a blanket government, it would be okay, independent, it would not be okay. It would be one of the things, say you're invited to an interview, either they would see the interviews there, or depending the interviews, they'd see the body art there, or they might not. But that might be a question that you would raise. Is this actually against school policies or anything like that? You might also put in your employment request in that little questionnaire uh, that you wish to be paired with schools where that would not be an issue. So certainly flagging it from the start, being proactive about it. Some schools won't care, some schools will. We don't have a list of those that do and don't. It tends to vary about different leadership teams and things like that.
Perfect. No, well spoken. Yes. So on that profile is where you can list some of your, I guess, needs and requirements as well. So if you're willing to travel, how far you're willing to travel to go to your employment, if you're willing to relocate, that's where you'd put in all that information. Um, One thing we will, which I might, if you want to speak on a little bit more, I've just had a question come through. Obviously, we mentioned that there's a pay scale for government employment.
Yep.
Students offered a certain band.
Mhm.
In non-government, how would that work? Depending on a range of factors. Do you want to speak on that?
Yeah, so obviously government schools are bound by the EBA, and the pay scale of whatever level that is set as the minimum. So for example, if a school recognizes you have additional experience, they can always progress you up that pay scale, perhaps a level, depending on your experience. In terms of non-government schools, they tend not to have a paraprofessional pay scale, but we request that you're not paid below the government wage. So certainly that it can be considered the minimum. Some non-government schools will match that minimum. Others will exceed it. Others might have a negotiation process for that. So it can vary, but that level, that $62,000 or just over, is set as the minimum for our interns. Um, Non-government, there's more likely to be a little bit of wiggle room around what that looks like than in government schools because they do have that prescribed pay scale to follow.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I've got two more questions, which I'm hoping you'll be able to help me with. The first one is you may be able to speak on this. We may not be able to give this person particular information. I can talk on a little bit from a recruitment perspective, and that is if you notice a potential number, like the percentage of applicants with a conditional offer who receive employment at a school. So for their internship, like if you might know any information about that, I can speak on it very, very briefly.
Is that in terms of how many interns are employed at a particular school?
Tip A, it's looking like how many receive an offer after they apply, so an offer to study, and how many of those successfully go through our application, our employment process.
I don't have those numbers, but I'm hoping you might, Freya, or have some
I
idea.
can't speak on this is how many exactly got an offer, because we do have people that something may come up and they do have to leave the process as well, for a number of reasons. Typically, I would say for students, how it will work is that they will nominate government or non-government um, preference. If they want to work at a government school or a non-government school, they will go through the process like that. Typically, they will be contacted by a few schools, depending on their location they've given, how far they're willing to travel. If it gets to the end of that process, which is typically about a 4-week process, and there's not been the right school for them, we then combine um, students to be then employed by government or non-government schools. So they get to then have a range more schools available to them. Typically, I would say it's more likely that a student would elect to leave the process for another reason rather than not securing employment. That's my experience from the recruitment side of things. That's just what I would say. It's more likely they would leave because they can't defer it rather than they haven't secured employment.
Correct. I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question, thinking it was about the application process, not the employment process. But
That's okay.
you've explained it perfectly. So once we go through that initial matching, any interns who are not matched after that go into a collapsed pool. And that's also where the department does some hunting for us. So they can be looking at all of the jobs available in schools in Victoria and reaching out, going, we've got these interns, consider them for this position. So certainly it's not, you don't get found anyone, you're out of the course. There's that stage of looking at broader options as well as actively looking for schools that might meet your needs. So, yeah, as Freya said, I think most people who do not go through the employment process and end up in the course are more likely due to things like changing their mind or changing personal circumstances, for example, rather than not being able to be paired with an employer.
Perfect. And the last question would be quite a good one to finish on, I think. What would you find the longer term benefits are of someone doing a master's of teaching in terms of their career development down the track and moving into leadership roles?
Yeah, so I guess one of the benefits that our interns talk about is this is the hard way of doing a teaching degree. And so by being able to do this course, and I don't want to say surviving it because that makes it sound terrible, but succeeding in it and going through these challenges sets you up really well, both in terms of yourself and knowing that your professional skills are at a really good level, but also in terms of employers about knowing your dedication to the profession and having these challenges that you've been able to work through and succeed with. Because you have this 2-year window at your employer, it allows you to establish yourself. So the first term, the first semester might be just getting by. The second year is when our interns really start to establish themselves, and many of our interns will then go on into further employment at that school. Now, the benefit that you have having come through the internship is you've already done the hard work in establishing yourself. So if you continue with your employer once you're a graduate teacher, that's when our interns would tend to be offered perhaps leadership positions earlier than graduates who need perhaps that 2 years to prove themselves working independently as a classroom teacher. So potentially it allows some earlier career progression in terms of leadership roles, particularly things year level coordinators, student wellbeing is where a lot of our students will get initial teaching roles. But also having this track record of saying, well, I was in a really tough place. It is a very hard course to do, studying full time, working 4 days a week. And I was able to succeed, and not just succeed, but to do really, really well for my students and as a colleague for that school is something that sets our interns up in really good steads for employers because they know that you can handle many of the pressures that might come with leadership positions, which is something that our graduates from the Master of Teaching Secondary might need to establish themselves for a couple of years before being offered such opportunities.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for that one. And that is it for the webinar. We want to thank everyone who's attended online and had their questions answered. You can always submit an inquiry through to our website. It will come through to myself and the team if you do have any questions as well. Just one more thing to note, applications close this coming Thursday evening, August 29th. After that, we will begin. We're already assessing applications. If you've submitted one, we're starting to get to assess more and more. Even after that one closes, offers will be released as we move into the employment process as well. But once again, thank you for joining us online. Thank you also so much to Dr. Scott Cameron, who's been here speaking about the program and answered some of your questions as well. We hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.